My biological brother just called me to say that my father stopped breathing the moment he saw the morning news, and my mother is screaming into the phone that I'm the murderer of my own family. But the most insane part of this situation is that exactly 1 week ago, these same people officially banned me from stepping foot in their estate so that my miserable energy wouldn't ruin their Christmas photos. Right now, I'm sitting in my empty studio apartment in Cambridge, drinking cold coffee and staring at a screen where my face is plastered across the front page of the financial section with a headline about my company being valued at over $2 billion. My name is Alice Miller, I'm 30 years old, and I just systematically destroyed my brother's reputation. A reputation he built for years on my blood, my sweat, and my stolen ideas. This whole mess didn't start today, but this December was when it hit the point of no return. My family is the definition of old money, from Connecticut. The Millers have owned Miller Tech for the last 40 years, and everything in our lives revolved around prestige and what the neighbors at the country club would think. My brother Brandon was their god. 5 years older than me, an Ivy League graduate, always in a flawless suit with a dazzling smile that hid a complete lack of substance. He was groomed from the cradle for the CEO's chair. I, on the other hand, was the inconvenient child. While Brandon was learning to play golf with politicians, I was locking myself in my room writing code. When I graduated from MIT with honors, my parents didn't even show up to the ceremony. Brandon had a major presentation for a new line of medical equipment that day. And the family must stand as a united front next to the future leader. Alice, don't be selfish. I got used to being a shadow. I got used to being introduced at family dinners as our daughter who helps out in the IT department, even though I was the only one who actually understood how our software worked. 3 years ago, I independently began developing an algorithm called Predictive Core. It was a revolutionary neural network for the early detection of cancer. I did it at night in my pathetic apartment, while during the day I listened to Brandon's condescending jokes about me being just a sysadmin with delusions of grandeur. But when Miller Tech started having serious issues with investors earlier this month, the family's tone shifted instantly. My mother summoned me for a serious talk. She sat in her living room with a glass of Chardonnay and told me flat out, "Alice, Brandon needs a breakthrough. Your work on neural networks, give it to him. You're part of this family, and he is the face of the company." I tried to explain that this was my personal project, something I had poured everything I owned into. My mother's response sounded like a death sentence. "Your projects are garbage if they don't serve the Miller name. Either you give the code to your brother, or you are no longer a daughter to us." I refused, and in that second I became a pariah. Brandon, that prick, didn't wait. He tried to hack into my private server using his Miller Tech administrative credentials, thinking I was still that naive little girl. He didn't know that 6 months ago, I had secretly registered all the patents in my own name and started negotiations to go public independently of their sinking business. The climax came on December 25th. While they were celebrating Christmas in their mansion, raising toasts to New Horizons, which was just Brandon's code for the ideas he thought he'd stolen from me, I sat alone and double-checked my final documents for Forbes. My mother personally texted me, "Don't you dare come. You betrayed your brother with your stubbornness. You are no longer a guest here." I didn't go. But on New Year's Eve, when they were expecting a triumph, I released the interview with the receipts. Recordings of conversations where Brandon demanded I hand over the code, screenshots of his hack attempts, and legal documents proving Miller Tech had zero rights to my technology. It's now 3 a.m. My phone is exploding with calls from lawyers and my mother's curses. Brandon is professionally finished. My father is in the hospital. And I, for the first time in 30 years, I feel like I don't have to apologize for being the smartest person in the room. This has been a long month, and believe me, this is only the beginning of their end. The silence of my apartment after I hung up on Brandon was deafening, but it was the kind of silence that feels like a victory. I spent the next 6 hours watching the digital world melt down. You have to understand, the tech community is a shark tank, and Brandon had just been dropped into it bleeding. By 8 a.m. on January 1st, the Forbes article was the most shared piece on LinkedIn. People I hadn't spoken to in years were messaging me, but I ignored them all. I was focused on the data. My company NeuralThread was officially public, and while the Miller family empire was cratering, my valuation was climbing. Around noon, my mother sent a text that was surprisingly calm, which is how she gets when she's planning something truly venomous. Alice, your father is stable. We are at the hospital. If you have any shred of humanity left, you will call the Forbes editor and tell them there was a misunderstanding. We can fix this as a family. I didn't reply. I knew exactly what fixing it as a family meant. It meant me signing away my rights in exchange for a seat at a table where I'd still be expected to serve the wine. Let's go back to the second week of December, when the mask really started to slip. I was still technically a consultant at Miller Tech, and I had been working out of their Stanford office. Brandon would walk into my workspace without knocking, leaning over my shoulder with that expensive cologne that always made me want to gag. He started asking hypothetical questions about my predictive core architecture. Alice, if someone were to, say, integrate this into our existing diagnostic hardware, would the latency be an issue? I told him it wasn't designed for their outdated machines. He just smiled, that practiced politician smile, and said, "Everything is a team effort here, sis. Don't forget who gave you your first paycheck." That was the lie they lived by. They thought that because they paid for my food when I was 10, they owned the thoughts in my head at 30. A few days after that, I caught one of Brandon's lead engineers trying to mirror my private cloud directory. They weren't even subtle about it. They thought I was just the girl who does computers, a technician who wouldn't notice a basic brute force attempt. I didn't confront them. Instead, I spent 48 hours straight setting up a honey pot, a fake directory filled with encrypted garbage code that looked like my algorithm but was actually a series of dead ends. I watched in real time as they downloaded it, feeling a cold, sharp joy. But the emotional weight was starting to hit me. It's one thing to outsmart a competitor. It's another to realize your own brother is actively trying to rob you while your mother cheers him on. I remember a dinner on December 15th. It was supposed to be a truce dinner. My father was there, looking gray and tired. He reached across the table and touched my hand. "Alice, Brandon tells me you're being difficult about the new integration. We're all under a lot of stress. Why can't you just be a team player?" He didn't even know Brandon was trying to steal it. He just knew Brandon was stressed. I looked at him, this man who used to read me bedtime stories, and realized he was just as much a victim of the Brandon is God cult as I was a casualty of it. He was weak, and his weakness was the fuel for Brandon's arrogance. I left that dinner and went straight to my lawyer, a shark named Sarah who specializes in IP theft. We sat in her office until 2 a.m. I showed her the logs of the hack attempts. I showed her the emails from my mother threatening to disown me if I didn't cooperate. Sarah looked at me and said, "Alice, they aren't just trying to take your work. They're trying to erase your existence as an independent creator. If you don't strike first, they will use the Miller Tech legal team to bury you in non-compete lawsuits until you're bankrupt." That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty. By the third week of December, I was living on adrenaline and espresso. I was finalizing the IPO filings for Neural Thread, while pretending to still be a loyal consultant for Miller Tech. I had to play the part. I went to the office, sat in the meetings, and watched Brandon present my progress to the board as if he were the one directing the vision. He even had a PowerPoint slide titled, "The Brandon Miller Innovation Initiative." I sat in the back of the room taking notes, feeling like a spy in my own life. The tension in the house was unbearable. My mother had stopped talking to me entirely, communicating only through passive-aggressive post-it notes left on the kitchen counter or through Brandon. They were already spending the money they thought the new Miller Tech would make. Brandon bought a new Porsche. My mother was scouting vacation homes in Aspen. They were celebrating a victory they hadn't won yet. Built on a foundation of theft they thought I was too weak to stop. What they didn't know, what I kept hidden even from my own team, was that I had recorded every single strategy session, where Brandon discussed how to rebrand my algorithm. I had months of audio files. I had the metadata from the hack attempts. I was building a cage, and Brandon was walking into it with his head held high, convinced that I was still the quiet little girl who would do anything for a crumb of parental approval. On December 20th, when my mother officially told me I wasn't invited to the Christmas gala because we need a positive environment for the investors, I didn't cry. I went home, called the Forbes reporter and said, "I have the evidence. Let's go." Now back in the present, the phone won't stop ringing. It's not just the family. It's the board of Miller Tech. They've realized that Brandon didn't just lie to me, he lied to them. He promised them a revolution he didn't own. And the legal NDA they tried to force me to sign? Sarah found a loophole big enough to drive a truck through. Because they tried to use Miller Tech resources to hack my private server, they violated federal cybersecurity laws, which nullifies any family loyalty agreements they thought they had. I'm looking out my window at the gray Boston skyline. I'm a billionaire on paper, but I'm an orphan in reality. My mother just sent another text. The lawyers are filing a defamation suit tomorrow morning. You have until midnight to retract. Don't destroy your father's legacy over a tantrum. I deleted it. They still think this is a tantrum. They still don't realize that I'm not screaming. I'm just speaking the truth. And the truth is a fire that's about to consume everything they have left. By January 5th, the family spat had officially turned into a corporate war zone. Miller Tech stock was in a free fall, dropping 15% in a single trading session as institutional investors began to smell the rot. But instead of backing down, my family doubled down on their aggression. I woke up that Tuesday to a process server banging on my door at 6 a.m. They weren't just suing me for defamation. They were filing an emergency injunction to freeze my personal assets, claiming that Neural Thread was built using stolen proprietary trade secrets belonging to Miller Tech. It was a classic move. They knew they couldn't win on the merits, so they tried to starve me out. My mother followed the legal papers with a voicemail that sounded like it was recorded in a walk-in freezer. Alice, we have more lawyers than you have friends. We will tie you up in discovery for the next 10 years. You'll be 50 by the time you see a cent of that IPO money. Is this really how you want to spend your life? Alone and bankrupt? I didn't panic. Called Sarah. They're swinging heavy, I said. Sarah just laughed. They're swinging blind, Alice. They think it's 1990 and they can just bully a woman into submission. They don't realize you have the server logs. But the stress was starting to manifest physically. I wasn't sleeping. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart rate spiked. I started seeing Brandon's face on every news cycle, not as the golden boy anymore, but as a victim of sibling jealousy. He actually went on a local business news segment and sat there, looking humble in a navy sweater, telling the anchor that I was struggling with mental health issues, and that the family was deeply saddened by my delusions. The gaslighting was world-class. For a moment, looking at him on the screen, I felt that old familiar spark of self-doubt. Maybe I am the problem? Maybe I should have just helped him? But then I remembered the recording from December 22nd. I pulled it up on my laptop and hit play. It was the night I had gone to the estate to pick up the last of my things. I had left my recorder running in my pocket. Brandon had cornered me in the library. His voice wasn't humbled then. It was a snarl. "Listen to me, you little bitch," he had hissed. "You are a rounding error in this company. If you think you're taking that code to a VC, I will make sure you never work in this industry again. I'll tell everyone you're unstable. I'll tell them you stole the base architecture from my private files. Who are they going to believe? The CEO of a 40-year-old firm? Or a girl who lives in a glorified closet in Cambridge?" Listening to that refreshed my resolve. I decided it was time to stop playing defense. If they wanted a war over proprietary secrets, I would show them exactly what their secrets looked like. On January 10th, I initiated Phase 2. I didn't just have the code. I had the communications between Brandon and his head of engineering. I had a thread where Brandon explicitly instructed them to find a backdoor into Alice's cloud and copy the core modules because she's being a brat. I sent these files to the SEC and the board of directors at Miller Tech. I wanted the board to know that their CEO was not just a liar, but a liability who had exposed the entire company to federal hacking charges. The blowback was instantaneous. My father called me that evening. It was the first time he'd spoken to me since the hospital. He didn't sound angry. He sounded broken. "Alice, the board is talking about removing Brandon. They're talking about a criminal investigation. If this happens, the company dies. Thousands of people will lose their jobs. Your mother she's not herself. Please, for the sake of the people who work for us, take it back. Say the files were altered. We'll give you whatever you want. 30% of the company? 40? Just stop this." "Dad," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "Brandon tried to put me in prison. He tried to tell the world I was crazy. Where were you when he was saying those things on TV?" "I was trying to keep the peace, Alice," he shouted. No, I replied. You were keeping the silence. And silence is what let him become a monster. I hung up. 10 minutes later, my mother sent a photo to our family group chat. A chat I had muted but hadn't left. It was a picture of my childhood bedroom completely gutted. All my books, my old computer parts, my trophies. Everything was in a heap on the driveway being rained on. Her caption was, "The trash has been moved to where it belongs. Don't ever call this house again." The tension reached a boiling point on the 15th. Miller Tech called an emergency board meeting. I was invited to testify via Zoom. I sat in my office, my hands shaking so hard I had to sit on them. Brandon was there, sitting at the long mahogany table, looking like a caged animal. He didn't know I had the email thread with his engineer. He thought it was still my word against his. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't give a speech. I didn't cry. I just shared my screen and played the audio of him threatening me in the library. Then I showed the email thread. The silence in that boardroom was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Brandon started to stand up, his face turning a dark, bruised purple. This is a fabrication. She's a coder, she can fake anything. One of the board members, an older woman who had known my father for decades, looked at Brandon with pure disgust. "Sit down, Brandon," she said. "You've said enough." I logged off the call and sat in the dark for 3 hours. I had won the battle, but the war was getting bloodier. I knew what was coming next. My mother wasn't a boardroom fighter. She was a scorched earth fighter. And she still had the one thing I couldn't protect with code. Our family's deepest, darkest secret, the one she'd been holding over my father's head for 20 years. And I knew with a sickening certainty that she was about to weaponize it against me. By January 20th, the atmosphere had shifted from a legal battle to something much more sinister. Brandon had been officially suspended by the board, and Miller Tech was essentially a ghost ship. But my mother wasn't finished. She knew that the IPO was the only thing I had left to protect my future, and she found the one pressure point I hadn't reinforced. My co-founder and the man I had trusted with my life for the last 5 years, Marcus. I walked into our shared office space in Cambridge on a Tuesday morning to find Marcus sitting at his desk, staring at a legal manila envelope. He wouldn't look me in the eye. "Alice," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Your mother called me. She didn't offer me money. She offered me protection." I felt a cold pit form in my stomach. My mother had spent decades in the high society circles of Connecticut. She knew where everybody was buried, even in the tech world. It turns out Marcus had a messy, complicated legal history involving an old visa issue and an offshore account he'd used to fund his first failed startup. It was small-time stuff, but in the middle of a billion-dollar IPO it was lethal. She told me that if I don't testify that you were the one who stole the base code from Brandon's private server, she'll hand over my records to the Department of Justice, Marcus said, finally looking at me. His eyes were red. "Alice, I have a family. I can't go to prison. She's a monster. She has copies of documents I didn't even know existed." The betrayal hit me harder than anything Brandon had done. Brandon was a predictable predator. My mother was a strategist who used people like chess pieces. She was willing to destroy my company, my reputation, and my best friend just to protect the honor of a son who was a proven thief. I spent that night in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the truth wasn't going to be enough. I was being outmaneuvered by a woman who had no soul left to lose. But then the twist happened. At 11 p.m. my father showed up at my door. He wasn't wearing a suit. He looked like he'd been sleeping in his car. He pushed past me into the kitchen and sat down, his hands trembling. "I can't let her do it, Alice," he said. "I've spent 20 years letting her run this family with fear, but this is the end." I stood by the sink, wary. "What are you talking about, Dad?" "The reason Brandon is the golden boy," he said, his voice dropping to a hollow whisper. "The reason she protects him like a cult leader. Brandon isn't my son, Alice. He's the result of an affair she had with the man who founded our primary competitor back in the 90s. She's been using Miller Tech to funnel money into a trust for him for 2 decades. She isn't protecting the family legacy. She's protecting her secret and the man she actually loved." I felt the room spin. Everything clicked. The way she looked at Brandon with adoration and at me with cold indifference. The way she was willing to let Miller Tech, my father's life work, burn to the ground just to make sure Brandon had a win. She had been embezzling from our own family business to build a golden parachute for her illegitimate son, all while making me feel like an outsider in my own home. I have the bank records, my father said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. She thinks I'm too weak to look. She thinks I'm too scared of the scandal. But I'd rather be the man who lost his wife than the man who helped his daughter be erased. I looked at the drive. This was the nuclear option. If I used this, the Miller legacy would be a smoking crater. The scandal would be national news. It wouldn't just be about tech theft. It would be a tabloid explosion of infidelity, embezzlement, and a 20-year lie. My father would be humiliated. Brandon would be a social pariah. My mother would likely face jail time for the financial fraud. You realize what happens if I release this? I asked. I do, he said, standing up. He looked me in the eyes, and for the first time I saw the man I thought he was when I was a child. I've been a coward for 30 years, Alice. It's time I let you be the hero. You have 48 hours until the final IPO hearing. Use it. He left, and I was left with a moral dilemma that felt like a chokehold. I could win the corporate war and save Marcus by destroying my father's dignity and the last shred of my family's name. Or I could let Marcus be the scapegoat and let my mother win, keeping the secret buried. The hearing was set for January 22nd. I sat at my desk, the thumb drive glowing in the dark, watching the clock tick toward midnight. I had 48 hours to decide if I was willing to become the monster they always accused me of being in order to finally truly be free. January 22nd arrived with the kind of biting cold that makes the air feel like glass. The IPO hearing was held in a private conference room in downtown Boston, overlooking the frozen harbor. My mother was there, sitting next to Brandon and a team of 6 lawyers. She looked regal, her chin tilted up, convinced that her blackmail of Marcus had secured her victory. She didn't even look at my father, who was sitting in the back of the room, a ghost in his own life. The lead investigator for the SEC opened the floor. Marcus, you've indicated you wish to revise your statement regarding the origin of the predictive core algorithm. Please proceed. I looked at Marcus. He was trembling. He looked at my mother, then at me. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Not the bank records, but a copy of the thumb drive's file directory. I slid it across the table toward my mother. She glanced down, and for the first time in my life, I saw the blood drain from her face. She recognized the account numbers. She recognized the names. She knew that the nuclear option was sitting inches from my hand. I leaned in and whispered, "If Marcus speaks a single lie, every tabloid in the country gets the full drive. Let him tell the truth, and I'll let you walk away with your prestige. But you leave Miller Tech, you leave my father, and you never speak my name again." It was the most brutal transaction of my life. I wasn't just defending a patent. I was bartering with the remains of a family. My mother stared at the paper for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked at the investigator and said, "There is no need for Marcus to revise his statement. My son, Brandon, was mistaken in his claims. The technology belongs to Alice." The room went silent. Brandon let out a sound, a choked, pathetic gasp of betrayal. He turned to her, his face contorted. "Mom? What are you doing? You said." "Be quiet, Brandon," she snapped, her voice dead. The hearing ended 20 minutes later. The legal victory was absolute. Neural Thread's IPO was cleared, and by noon, I was officially one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country. But as the lawyers shook hands and the reporters clamored outside, I felt an overwhelming sense of hollowed-out peace. I walked out to the parking garage. My father was waiting by my car. "You didn't release it," he said. "No," I replied. "I used it to buy my freedom. If I had released it, I would have spent the next 10 years being the daughter of that scandal. I wanted to be Nora Townsend, the CEO. Not Nora Townsend, the girl whose mother was a thief and a fraud." "What will you do now?" he asked. "I'm moving the headquarters to San Francisco," I said. "I need an ocean between me and this city." I looked at him and I realized that while I had saved him from public humiliation, our relationship was also a casualty of this war. He had stayed silent for too long, and no amount of secret sharing at the 11th hour could bridge the gap of 20 years of neglect. I hope you find some peace, Dad, but I can't be the one to give it to you. The final week of January was a blur of packing and legal signatures. Brandon was forced to resign from Miller Tech, and the board initiated a quiet, internal audit to recover the funds my mother had funneled away. She disappeared to a villa in Italy, fleeing the wreckage she had created. On January 31st, exactly 1 month after the nightmare began, I stood in my empty Cambridge apartment. The fire from the fireworks on New Year's Eve seemed like a lifetime ago. My phone buzzed, a notification from my bank. The IPO funds had cleared. 9 figures. 10 figures. It didn't feel like money, it felt like a shield. I realize now that people always talk about standing up for yourself, as if it's a heroic cinematic moment. In reality, it's a lonely, exhausting process of cutting off the people you were supposed to love, because they refused to see you. I didn't lose my family this month. I simply stopped pretending I ever had one. I'm on the plane now, watching the East Coast disappear under the clouds. I'm 30 years old, I'm a billionaire, and I'm completely alone. And for the first time in my life, that doesn't feel like a failure. Feels like a beginning. Money can buy you a lot of things: lawyers, privacy, a penthouse in San Francisco. No, it can't buy back the daughter who wanted her father to show up to her graduation, or the sister who wanted her brother to be proud of her. Those versions of me are dead. The woman who is left is someone I'm still getting to know. To anyone reading this on Reddit or wherever this story ends up, document everything. Trust your gut. And never, ever let someone else's need for peace be the reason you allow yourself to be erased. The cost of speaking up is high, but the cost of staying silent is your very soul. I think I'm going to be okay.